I'm Miranda Thorne, and let me tell you a story. My story. Not the polished version you might read in an alumni magazine or see on a glossy law firm website. Not the sanitized version my parents used to tell their country club friends. This is the truth, the one that starts with silence and ends with a voice. Mine. For most of my life, I was the good daughter, the one who never caused trouble, who paid her own tuition, who never asked for help. I learned early that in my family, love was conditional and loyalty was transactional. My younger brother, Caleb, he got rescued. I got reminders. He burned through second chances like birthday candles. I lit my own way in the dark. But when my grandmother died, Margaret Everett, the only person who truly saw me, the silence cracked. She left me everything, the house, the portfolio, the family legacy, not because she loved me more, but because she trusted me to protect it. They weren't prepared for that. They weren't prepared for me. What followed was not just a legal battle, it was a reckoning. If you've ever wondered what happens when the forgotten daughter comes back, not to ask, but to claim, this is that story. And no, it won't end the way they expected. Miranda Thorne was always the perfect daughter. Until perfection became a prison she had to escape. I was 12 when I first understood what it meant to be useful but not loved. It was a Tuesday night, the kind that smelled like lemon polish and restraint. I sat straight-backed at the polished mahogany dinner table, napkin folded just so, hands in my lap like a figurine placed precisely where it wouldn't offend the symmetry. Across from me, Caleb, my younger brother, was telling a story about a fight he'd gotten into at school. My mother, Evelyn, gasped at the bruises on his knuckles. My father, Robert, nodded solemnly and said, "Boys will be boys." I'd gotten straight A's that week, no one asked. What I remember most wasn't the silence, but the noise that followed. Caleb knocked over a crystal glass, the Waterford set from her mother's wedding, in my registry, and it shattered across the table like a gunshot. No one blinked. My mother turned to me and said, "Miranda, you should have kept him calm." I, 12, disciplined, invisible, said nothing. That night, I heard my parents talking in their bedroom. The door was ajar, just enough. Evelyn's voice was low but clear. "Caleb must inherit everything. Miranda." She always said it that way. Not she'll accept it or she'll agree, she'll understand, as if compliance was my inheritance. But Margaret Everett, my grandmother, saw it differently. She had eyes like a hawk's and a voice like church bells at dawn, elegant but impossible to ignore. Unlike the others, she didn't treat my silence as proof of contentment. She saw it for what it was, learnt survival. I remember sitting with her one weekend in her study. She'd pulled out an old leather-bound portfolio of stock certificates, showing me names I couldn't pronounce and explaining compounding interest like it was bedtime poetry. "Independence is not the same as isolation," she told me. "You'll need to learn the difference." At 16, I wanted to scream every time my mother told guests that Caleb was the charismatic one and I was the responsible child. The way she said it, responsible sounded like burden. But I wore the label like armor. If I was to be overlooked, I'd make myself impossible to replace. I joined every honors program, learned to manage money better than any adult I knew, and kept a private notebook where I recorded every broken promise every time I was punished for Caleb's mistakes. It became a kind of ledger, a reckoning in ink. My parents rarely hit me with words. No, their cruelty was quieter. Expectations never met, praise withheld, decisions made behind closed doors. When I was accepted to Northwestern on a full scholarship, they didn't come to the ceremony. Caleb had a rough week, and Evelyn said the family needed to support him. I walked the stage alone. But Margaret was there. She was the one who handed me the envelope that day, not a card, but a certified letter, naming me as her future financial executor. I hadn't asked. I hadn't even known she drafted such a document. But as I held it in my hands, I knew what it meant. She saw me. Back then, I didn't know what she was preparing me for. I thought she just wanted me to have a seat at the table. I didn't realize she was building me a fortress. It wasn't until years later, long after I'd built a career and carved out a life for myself in downtown Chicago, that I understood what that letter really meant. That everything my family had tried to keep from me, legacy, power, voice, was already mine, waiting, quiet, ironclad, What they didn't count on was that I remembered everything, and one day I'd return with records, memory, and a voice sharp enough to cut glass. The call came on a rainy Thursday. I was in the middle of reviewing a compliance audit for a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen read Wilmington and Everett LLP. My breath caught before I even answered. Miss Thorne? The voice was smooth, professional. We're contacting you regarding the execution of Margaret Everett's estate. As named executor and primary beneficiary, we'll need your physical presence for the official reading and property transfer, preferably within 7 business days. I said nothing for a beat. It wasn't that I was surprised. Margaret had always hinted, never explicitly, but with that same calm finality she used when making irreversible decisions. Still, hearing it aloud, framed in legal language, made it real. She had done it. She had given me the power they never wanted me to have. Miss Thorne, the voice repeated. I'll be there, I said. The Wilmette house sat like a ghost among trimmed hedges and symmetrical driveways. Colonial, white-painted brick with black shutters and stone lions flanking the entrance. A home more facade than warmth. I hadn't stepped inside since college. Caleb's 22nd birthday had ended in a scene. He'd called me the audit ghost in front of everyone, accusing me of always sniffing for flaws. My parents had laughed. I hadn't returned since. But now, the keys were mine. All of them. The lock turned with a metallic click that sounded like the past surrendering. The air inside still smelled of furniture polish and old magnolia. Dust hung like suspended accusations. I walked through the foyer, slowly, letting my fingers drift along the wainscoting. Each creak of the hardwood floor was a memory, each painting a portrait of someone I'd never been allowed to be. And then I reached the attic. Margaret's instructions had been clear, written in her own script. To Miranda, the box is yours to open when I'm gone. No sooner. You'll know what to do. The attic door groaned open, and I climbed the narrow stairs into silence. The box was there. Small, wooden, mahogany with a tarnished brass lock. I didn't hesitate. Inside was a bundle of letters, each bound with velvet ribbon. Beneath them, a flash drive, and below that, a birth certificate. Not mine. Caleb Everett Thorne. I froze. The father's name read unknown. The mother's name, Evelyn Thorne. Date of birth matched. But the father line was blank. I reached for the flash drive, my hands trembling. I plugged it into my laptop right there on the attic floor, surrounded by dust and ghosts. It was an audio file, a recording. Margaret's voice, fragile but steady, filled the air. If you're listening to this, Miranda, then I've gone. And you've earned the truth they always kept from you. Caleb is not your father's son. He was born from a secret, protected by silence, and paid for with your inheritance. Your time, your recognition, your rightful place. I've watched long enough. This ends with you. I sat still for a long time, letting the silence after her words settle into my bones. My whole life I'd been told to understand, to accept, to carry the burden of someone else's protection. Now I carry the truth instead. As I descended the attic stairs, clutching the flash drive and birth certificate, I heard the front door open. Footsteps, familiar, measured, then a voice. Smooth and mocking. Well, look who came home early. You're not supposed to be here. That was the first thing Caleb said as he stepped into the hallway, his perfectly polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor like punctuation marks on a threat. I stood at the base of the stairs, still holding the flash drive and the folded birth certificate in one hand, my other gripping the banister for steadiness. The afternoon light cut across the foyer, casting long, slanted shadows between us. It felt biblical, like Cain and Abel, only neither of us was innocent. I was invited, I replied calmly, by the legal owner of this house. You might remember her. Our grandmother? Caleb scoffed and crossed his arms. His tailored suit and slicked back hair looked like they belonged more to a courtroom than a family home. You think one will change everything? No, I said, stepping down the last stair. I think one will revealed everything. He froze, just a fraction, but I saw it. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted toward the staircase behind me, probably calculating what I'd found. He was always a terrible liar, but he had a gift for pretending the truth never mattered. "Don't pull this, Miranda," he warned. "You don't want to make this ugly." "It's pretty ugly," I said. I just finally stopped looking away. The reading of the will was held 2 days later in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Lake Michigan shoreline. The firm, Wilmington and Everett LLP, had represented our family since before I was born. They knew how to keep secrets and how to weaponize legacy. Evelyn arrived in a powder blue suit and pearls, looking like a senator's wife from a campaign ad. She didn't meet my eyes. When I greeted her, she offered me her cheek like a stranger at a gala. Cold, air kiss, dismissive. Caleb sat beside her, legs crossed, phone in hand. He didn't even pretend to care about the optics. To his right was their new lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Christine Mayer, whose reputation was all strategic litigation and zero empathy. Then there was me, alone in a charcoal gray dress, hair pinned back, silent. When the partner began reading Margaret's will, no one breathed. Her voice echoed from the page like it had from the attic recording, steady, unwavering. "To my granddaughter, Miranda Thorne, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to the Wilmette property, my trust portfolio, and all personal effects held in storage under the name Everett Holdings." Evelyn flinched. "To Caleb Everett Thorne, I leave my piano, the one in the study, which once belonged to my mother. It is not a gesture of affection, but of closure." Caleb's face turned crimson. I didn't react. I didn't smile or gloat, but inside a small, long-denied part of me whispered, "Finally." The partner continued, detailing legal logistics, transition timelines, and transfer of titles. I kept my gaze steady while Evelyn's hand curled tightly around her leather clutch. When the reading ended, silence fell like a curtain. And then Evelyn spoke. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "This isn't what Margaret would have wanted. It's not binding." "It is," Christine Mayer interjected smoothly. "There are signatures, witnesses, notarized statements." Evelyn turned to me, her eyes burning. "What did you do to her?" I stood. "I told her the truth, something you never did." Later that night, back at the Wilmette house, I walked through the silent halls with a tumbler of scotch in my hand. The legal victory should have tasted sweeter, but it came layered with bitterness. I didn't win out of love. I won because I was the last one she could trust. I stopped in front of the study, the room where Margaret had taught me to read music. The piano stood in the corner, untouched, waiting. I pressed the key. Middle C rang out, clear and haunting, a sound like memory, and that's when I saw it. Tucked behind the sheet music rack, a slip of paper, yellowed with age. I pulled it free. It wasn't music. It was a letter, addressed to Evelyn, written in Margaret's elegant script. The envelope was thin, brittle. Its edges had curled with time, and the faint scent of lavender clung to it. Margaret's scent. I unfolded the letter carefully, my hands trembling as if they already knew this wasn't just another note from the past. "Evelyn, there are things I should have said long ago. Things you should have faced, not buried in inheritance or silence. If you're reading this, it means I trusted Miranda enough to find what you never dared confront. You always resented that she reminded me of her. You know who I mean. But secrets are not dead just because we silence them. They grow roots. And now the truth must stand on its own. You have 48 hours to tell her or I will. Margaret." I read it again and again. She reminded me of her. Who's her? I sank into the leather armchair by the window, heart pounding, the letter now aflame in my chest. This wasn't just a transfer of property, it was a reckoning. My victory wasn't accidental. It had been orchestrated, like a quiet symphony of justice written by a woman everyone had underestimated. Margaret had known everything. The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed every lock in the house. Evelyn's threats were empty, but her desperation made her unpredictable. I had no doubt she'd show up again, but this time, she'd be met with steel. Not courtesy. By noon, I was standing in the attic once more. The old wooden floor creaked beneath me as I searched for anything else Margaret might have left behind. I found a box labeled Florence 1969. Inside, faded photographs, handwritten notes, and one cassette tape with the words "For Her" scrawled in black marker. I took it downstairs to the study and slid it into the vintage cassette player Margaret had insisted on keeping. Static hissed. Then her voice, "If you're hearing this, it means Evelyn chose silence again. Miranda, I want you to know your mother was not the woman Evelyn claimed she was." I froze. Her name was Isabel. She was my daughter, Evelyn's older sister. The room seemed to tilt. She was never unstable. That was Evelyn's lie to cover her shame for trying to have Isabel committed when she refused to give up her baby. That baby was you. My knees buckled. I paused the tape, my breath ragged. I pressed play again. They told you your mother died in childbirth. It wasn't true. Evelyn had her declared mentally unfit, then locked her away in a private care facility under a false name. She died alone 2 years later. I couldn't stop it then. But I can make sure you know now. The air in the room thickened, pressing in on my lungs. I was never Evelyn's niece. I was her daughter, and she'd buried the truth, along with my mother. That night, as the sky bled into navy and the lights from the lakefront flickered like distant fires, I found myself sitting in the garden Margaret used to tend. Everything looked calm, but inside me a war was beginning. The phone buzzed. Private number. I hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice whispered, "You're not safe. They know you found the letter. They say grief comes in waves, but betrayal, it strikes like a blade, swift and precise, before the bleeding even begins." By morning, the cassette was locked in a safe I installed beneath the floorboards of the study. I had only slept 3 hours, but the adrenaline coursing through me was enough to keep me upright. Every breath I took in that house now tasted different. No longer of haunted memories, but of strategy. I wasn't just a niece returning home anymore. I was a daughter with a birthright stolen, and a truth buried beneath lies Evelyn had spun for decades. And I was done being quiet. I drove into town, to a place I hadn't set foot in since my late teens. The office of Geraldine Kessler, an attorney once feared for her uncanny ability to extract truths from the unlikeliest corner. She had represented Margaret once, long ago, during a land dispute with one of Evelyn's early business partners. If there was anyone who could help me weaponize a will and a bloodline, it was Geraldine. Her office smelled of sandalwood and old books. She looked up from a yellow legal pad, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. "Well," she said with a faint smile, "look who finally got tired of being lied to." I handed her the letter, then the cassette, and then, slowly, deliberately, the photograph I had taken from the Florence box. A picture of Margaret standing beside a young woman with sharp eyes and my cheekbones. She was my mother, Isabel. Geraldine listened to the tape in full, her face unreadable. When the final hiss faded out, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling a low whistle. This changes everything," she murmured. "We're not just talking about inheritance disputes anymore. If Isabel was declared mentally unfit under false pretenses and that declaration led to unlawful confinement, your aunt could be looking at criminal liability. Posthumously, for some, yes, but the damage, the pattern, the motive, it's a web." I nodded. I want it all exposed. "And what about the estate? Margaret's assets are frozen pending verification. But if this comes to light in court, you won't just be the primary heir. You'll be the daughter of the wrongfully institutionalized." "I don't care about titles," I said. "I want the truth made public. I want her legacy, my mother's legacy, restored." Geraldine smiled softly, almost like pride. "Then let's begin." Later that day, I returned to the estate and found the first signal that the war had begun. The gate was ajar. Inside, the scent of roses was strong, too strong. As I stepped into the foyer, the air was thick with perfume and something else, anticipation. Evelyn stood in the drawing room, dressed in her signature pearl gray coat, the same one she wore to every public fundraiser, as if goodness could be tailored and dry cleaned. "Miranda," she said, her voice honeyed, "we need to talk." I didn't flinch. "Now you want to talk?" Her eyes narrowed. "You've been digging, stirring things that were buried for a reason. You buried my mother, Evelyn. in paperwork and padded rooms. For a split second, her composure cracked. You don't understand the full story. I know enough to bring everything into the light, and trust me, I will. Evelyn didn't sit. She paced slowly, her heels clicking against the marble as if each step was a metronome counting down to an explosion. Stayed standing to equal footing. Equal power. You think you know what you're doing, she said at last. But playing with fire in this house never ends. Whoa, is that a threat? I asked, tilting my head, because I have a few flames of my own to light. She turned, eyes sharp. Your mother wasn't stable. She had delusions, fits of paranoia. You don't remember because you were a child. She was institutionalized without legal counsel, without a formal hearing, and you convinced the board she was a danger based on what, your word? Evelyn's silence was deafening. I found the tapes, I said. Her journals, letters Geraldine has already filed in probate court. You're done hiding behind the veil of concern. She let out a slow breath, then gave a small, tight smile. If you want to drag this family through the mud, go ahead. Just remember, mud splashes in every direction. Are you prepared for what will surface? I've lived under your shadow for too long to be afraid of dirt. Her gaze shifted, calculating, then softened. There's another way, Miranda. The one that doesn't end in blood and lawsuits. I crossed my arms. I'm listening. Drop this crusade. You'll get a seat at the table. I'll endorse your claim as co-heir to the estate, the foundation, the shares in Whitethorn Holdings. We can restore the public image. Together? A peace offering. It should have tempted me. Years of rejection, of being written out of everything, and now she dangled legitimacy like a carrot on a string. But I saw the trap. She wasn't offering peace. She was offering silence. You're trying to buy me, I said. But you don't get to decide my worth anymore. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then you leave me no choice. The room chilled. That night, I drove back to Geraldine's office to deliver more files, copies of my mother's medical records, recently declassified. They were riddled with inconsistencies, dosage changes without medical cause, signatures that looked forced. They drugged her to keep her docile, Geraldine muttered, flipping through the pages. This wasn't care, this was containment. My stomach twisted. Evelyn did this to preserve her control over the estate. Geraldine looked up. Then it's time to pull the trigger. 3 days later, the letter was mailed. An official notification to the Whitethorn Board of Trustees, an emergency hearing to contest Margaret's will based on fraudulent concealment of her biological granddaughter's existence, and to present criminal evidence against Evelyn for unlawful medical manipulation. The morning after the letter went out, my phone rang, unknown number. I answered, voice steady. This is Miranda. The voice on the other end was low, measured. You don't know me, he said. But I knew your mother. Isabel and I, we were close. I think it's time you saw the other half of the story. My pulse quickened. Who are you? He paused. You can call me Michael. I kept something of hers, a journal. One she wrote before everything fell apart. It might change what you think you know. I blinked. Why now? Because Evelyn isn't the only one who's been hiding things. He gave me an address in a quiet suburb in Raleigh, and then he hung up. I stood frozen, phone still in hand, as reality fractured around me. If what he said was true, then even my mother had secrets. And I wasn't just unearthing Evelyn's sins. I was about to rewrite everything I believed about my own blood. They invited me to the mansion not out of courtesy, but out of fear. When vipers convene, it's never for tea. It's for containment. It started with a gold-embossed envelope delivered by courier, the Whitethorn seal glinting like a threat on its wax seal. Inside, a single card. Family council meeting, Thursday, 7:00 p.m. Attendance required. I turned it over, no name signed. Just that strange clinical phrasing, family council, as if we were shareholders in some company, not survivors of a bloodline soaked in betrayal. I drove up to the estate slowly that Thursday evening, watching the iron gates yawn open like the jaws of something ancient and unwilling. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the lawn that once held garden parties I was never invited to. Now was walking straight into their den. The drawing room had been rearranged, circular seating instead of the traditional rows. Evelyn sat at the head, of course. Beside her, Julian, silent and uncomfortable. On the opposite side, my Uncle Henry sipped neat whiskey like it was armor. Madison, Evelyn's daughter, perched elegantly with her legs crossed, phone in hand, pretending disinterest. I stepped in, deliberately slow. "Miranda," Evelyn said with a smile so cold it could freeze bone. "Glad you could join us." "I wasn't aware it was optional." "No," she replied, "it wasn't." I took the empty seat directly across from her, letting my presence speak louder than my silence. "Geraldine had advised me not to reveal everything at once. Let them sweat first," she'd said. And they were sweating. Even Madison's practiced aloofness cracked for a second when I laid a manila folder on the table in front of me, untouched, yet utterly dangerous. "We're here," Evelyn began, "because recent events have forced us to reconsider the structure of the estate and its governance, particularly in light of surprising revelations." "You mean," I said, tone flat, "my return?" Julian cleared his throat. "It's more complicated than that." "No," I said, "it really isn't." Henry finally spoke. "Let's not turn this into another war. Miranda, we all understand you feel wronged." "You understand?" I leaned forward. "My mother was committed under questionable circumstances. Her daughter erased from the records. Her will altered, if not outright forged. And now you want to talk about feelings?" There was a beat of silence. Evelyn's face remained composed, but her fingers tapped against her glass with sharp precision. "This isn't about emotion," she said. "It's about legacy. We're offering you a share, Miranda, a legitimate seat. You could be reinstated officially." I let the silence stretch. It was bait, gloss and civility, but bait nonetheless. Give her a slice, they thought, and she'll stop carving. I opened the manila folder just slightly, just enough for them to glimpse what lay inside. Handwritten letters from my mother, testimony from former Whitethorn staff, and a sealed affidavit from a nurse who'd witnessed Evelyn visiting the psychiatric facility under false credentials. No. I closed the folder again. I'm not here for scraps. I'm here for the truth. The tension thickened like fog. Across the room, Madison's phone buzzed quietly. She glanced down, then paled. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. Madison looked up. You need to see this." She turned the screen toward Evelyn. Whatever she read made her blink. My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Evelyn hesitated. "Nothing, just irrelevant." But she stood up a second later. That alone was a sign. The room erupted into murmurs. Julian whispered something to Henry. Madison just stared at me. Whatever was on that screen, it had rattled, and that was no small feat. Miranda prepares to leverage the full power of the documents and alliances she's building. But the unknown message Madison received signals a new player entering the game. Or an old ghost returning to haunt. Madison's face stayed pale, her fingers trembling slightly as she placed her phone face down on the table. Evelyn didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. An eternity in a room like this. "I need to step out," she said, her voice thinner than usual. But I was already on my feet. "You're not going anywhere." Evelyn stiffened. "Excuse me?" "You summoned a family council," I said. "We're all here. We stay until it's over." Henry made a motion to intervene, but I raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Sit down, Henry. You've been sitting on the truth for 25 years. A few more minutes won't kill you." I pulled the folder closer, opening it fully this time. The pages made a soft fluttering sound as they spread out. Scanned letters, time-stamped photos, a copy of my mother's original will, and a recent affidavit signed by a woman named Lorraine Phelps. Evelyn's expression froze at the name. "You remember Lorraine, don't you?" I said. "She was the night nurse at Wind Hollow." "She remembers everything." Julian leaned forward. "Miranda, this is serious. Are you sure these documents are real?" "You're the one with a law degree. Why don't you verify them?" Silence. "I also have audio," I continued. "Recordings of conversations in this house made by someone you all thought was loyal to you." A bead of sweat rolled down Julian's temple. Eveline's hands were now clasped tightly together in her lap, white at the knuckles. Madison looked like she wanted to vanish. "Ah, see," I said, "I don't want an allowance. I don't want to be brought back in for appearances. I want every lie you've told about my mother, about me, corrected, in writing, in court, and in the press." "You're threatening to destroy us," Evelyn said softly. I'm offering you the chance to destroy yourselves a little more gracefully. Henry slammed his glass down. Enough! This is madness. We can't go to war in front of Madison. Madison is a grown woman, I said, turning to her, and if she still believes in this illusion of family unity, then she should hear the truth. Madison swallowed hard. I don't know what to believe anymore. Julian turned to Evelyn. Mom, maybe we should listen to her. She really has this much. Evelyn cut him off with a look. The same look that had probably silenced people for decades. But this time, it didn't land the same. I picked up the photo from the file, one I hadn't shown yet, and slid it across the table. It was a picture of Evelyn, disguised in a scarf and sunglasses, entering Wind Hollow the night after my mother's final breakdown. A nurse had snapped it out of suspicion but never spoke. Until now. Lorraine says you ordered staff not to contact me, that you told them my mother had cut me off, that I was dangerous, that she was unstable and needed containment. I did what I had to do, Evelyn said at last. And that's your mistake, I whispered. You always thought no one would ever question why you had to. Julian looked shell-shocked. Is this true? You kept Mom from her daughter? I saved this family's reputation, Evelyn hissed. You were too young to understand what was at stake. Miranda was a liability. That word? Liability? I saw Madison flinch. Henry looked down at the floor. For a moment, I thought Julian might stand up for me, but he didn't. The air cracked with something unseen, an old fracture finally splitting open. Then, Madison reached for her phone again. That message earlier, she said, voice barely audible. It was a forwarded email from someone named Delia Crane. Time stopped. Henry's face turned gray. No, he murmured. That's not possible. Who's Delia Crane? Julian asked, confused. Evelyn stood so suddenly her chair scraped hard against the marble floor. We're done here. But Madison ignored her. She handed me the phone. I read the email. The truth you seek is buried deeper than you think. Evelyn's betrayal wasn't the first, and she's not the only one attached. A birth certificate. Not mine. Not Evelyn's. Someone else's. Someone long thought dead. A forgotten name reemerges, Delia Crane, hinting at a betrayal older than Miranda's exile. But who is she? And why does Evelyn look like she's seen a ghost? You're not the only one who's been living with secrets, Miranda. The voice came from behind me, low and rough. Just as I stepped out of the Everett Estate's shadow, I turned on my heel, my pulse spiking. It was Uncle Thomas. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since the summer he vanished without warning, no explanation, no farewell. Growing up, he was the one adult who made me feel human in that house. While the others polished their lies into fine crystal, Thomas gave me rusted honesty. Flawed, painful, real. Now he looked older, thinner, eyes sunken but alert, as if time had been both cruel and enlightening. His suit was loose on him, collar unbuttoned, and he clutched a folder tightly in his left hand like it held his spine together. I heard about the meeting, he said. Evelyn's probably spinning it already, doesn't she? I don't know what to believe anymore, I replied. He gestured toward a small bench by the gardens, the same one he used to take me to when I was a child, when I had questions no one else wanted to answer. We sat in silence for a moment. Wind stirred the late autumn leaves. Then he placed a folder on my lap. You asked once why I left, he said. It wasn't because I couldn't handle the pressure. It was because I found something I wasn't supposed to find. I opened the folder. It held yellowed hospital records, correspondence between attorneys, a DNA report dated 1998, and a photo. A photo of a baby with Margaret Everett holding her, labeled Delia Crane, 1989. My stomach dropped. That name, I whispered. Madison found it. She said Evelyn looked like she'd seen a ghost. Thomas nodded. Because to Evelyn, she was one. She had another child? My voice trembled. He stared at me. No, she stole one. I stared at him, thunderstruck. She couldn't conceive again after Julian, he continued. And Margaret had always wanted to protect her image, her dynasty. When Margaret discovered Delia, a child born to one of the Everett housemaids and a man in Boston, she arranged everything. The birth certificate, the fake adoption. But Evelyn didn't keep her. She couldn't risk the scandal. So she had Delia institutionalized after the girl started showing signs of behavioral trauma, said she was unfit to live in a proper home. And no one said anything? I asked, horrified. Thomas scoffed. Everyone was complicit in some way. Paid off, threatened, silenced. I found out when I went to Winholo to check on Margaret's records and stumbled on a file that had been misfiled. Delia's intake papers, with Yvonne listed as the guardian. I confronted your grandmother. The next day I was asked to resign from the firm. A week later, I left the country. But why come back now? I asked, breathless. Because Delia is alive. Miranda, I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. Huh? She's in a halfway home outside Providence. She goes by Ellie now. And someone anonymous, has been paying for her care all these years. Who? Thomas hesitated. I think it was Margaret. But after she died, payments stopped. That's why Ellie started writing emails. She was trying to find someone, anyone, who'd listen. Why didn't you bring her forward before? Because the system is stacked, and because I didn't want her used as another weapon. I wanted to make sure you were ready, that you weren't just reacting out of rage, but rebuilding something stronger. I closed the folder and stared at the photo again. Delia's eyes. They looked like mine. What do I do now? Thomas leaned forward, gripping my hand. You give her a name, you give her justice, and you make Evelyn face what she buried. The weight of the folder felt heavier than paper. It felt like blood, like lineage. And just as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. One line lit up the screen. She's gone, Delia's missing. Just as Miranda uncovers the truth about her hidden cousin in the family's darkest betrayal, Delia disappears. I froze as the message glowed on the screen. Delia's missing. No name, no follow-up, just dread in 5 words. My fingers trembled as I handed the phone to Uncle Thomas. He read it, jaw tightening, then silently stood and motioned me to follow. We need to get to Providence, he said, now. The drive was just under 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity. The sun had begun to set behind gray November clouds, casting a dim haze over the New England landscape. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the folder tighter than I should have. This edge is cutting into my palm, but it was reminding me this was no dream. What if she's hurt? I asked, voice thin. She's smart, Thomas said, eyes on the road. She survived this long. But if someone found out she exists, if Evelyn knows, would she really go that far? I interrupted. Thomas looked at me, the corners of his mouth twitching with something like sorrow. You've seen what Evelyn's capable of. She buries them. The halfway home, St. Agnes Recovery Center, was tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac near a row of fading maple trees. The building was old, but cared for. An aide named Rosie met us at the front desk, her face creased with concern. She left this morning, she said, whispering. Didn't tell anyone. We thought she was just going for her usual walk, but she never came back. Her phone was left in her room. Did she seem off? I asked. Rosie hesitated. Scared. The last few days, she'd been getting these manila envelopes. No return address. She wouldn't let anyone else see them. Thomas and I exchanged a look. Could we see her room? He asked. Inside, the space was bare but neatly kept. A twin bed, a small desk, a corkboard with sketches, mostly birds, some trees, and one face. Margaret Everett, unmistakable in her pearl earrings and sharp cheekbones. She remembers her, I whispered. Thomas found a crumpled receipt in the trash. Bus ticket to Boston, dated that morning. Boston, I said. What's there? Maybe she went looking for someone from her past, Thomas murmured. Or someone lured her there. Suddenly the intercom buzzed at the nurse's station. A voice crackled. Miss Thorne? There's a call for you on line 3. I picked up. It was Delia. Miranda? Her voice was hoarse, distant, like it was being funneled through a tunnel of static and fear. Delia, where are you? I don't know. A bus station. Maybe Worcester? I thought I could handle it. I thought I could find the truth myself, but someone's following me. Stay where you are. We're coming for you, she inhaled shakily. They said I was a mistake, that I should have stayed buried. I didn't believe them until they showed me the photos. What photos? But she'd already hung up. The line went dead. We scrambled back into the car, hearts racing. "I'll track public surveillance footage," Thomas muttered, already dialing a contact from his old days at the law firm. "If Evelyn really sent someone—" "She's gone too far," I said. He didn't reply. 2 hours later, as night fell over Worcester, we arrived at the bus terminal. It was nearly empty. Cold winds swept across the concrete. I scanned the crowd, calling her name, no answer. Then, behind a row of vending machines, I found a scrap of paper. I recognized the handwriting. Delia's. "Don't trust the woman in red. She lied about the accident. She's not your mother either." I read the line twice. Then a whisper of memory returned. The red coat Evelyn wore the night of the fire? Years ago. A chimney accident that destroyed part of the estate's east wing. A wing that was supposedly under renovation. A fire that no one ever investigated. I turned to Thomas. What if the fire was an accident? What if Delia was there? His face went pale. Before he could answer, headlights swept across the lot. A sleek black town car pulled up, tinted windows, his license plate from New York. The back door opened slowly, and Evelyn stepped out, calm, composed, in a red coat. Just as Miranda begins to grasp the true scope of Evelyn's manipulation and Delia's desperate warning, the woman who might hold all the answers appears. Or is she here to make them disappear for good? They say the truth sets you free, but they never mention how much it can destroy first. The courtroom smelled like old wood, coffee, and fear. Sunlight slanted through the narrow windows of the Rutland County Courthouse, casting fractured beams across the oak floor. I sat behind the plaintiff's desk, flanked by Thomas on one side and my attorney Grace Duvall on the other. Evelyn sat across the aisle with her polished legal team, unbothered, uncaring, unreadable, but not invincible. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Justice Lanford, called the room to order. "This is a matter of Miranda Thorne versus Evelyn Blake regarding the validity of Margaret Everett's last will and testament and the alleged concealment of a biological heir." I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. Delia wasn't here. We had searched every corner of Worcester after that call, but she had vanished again, like a ghost returning to the shadows. But the note she left was enough. Combined with the files Thomas and I had pulled, DNA reports, hidden property transfers, Delia's original birth certificate, and even a secretly recorded audio tape of Evelyn's damning words. Our case had teeth. Still, I knew Evelyn had teeth of her own. Grace stood first, her voice confident but not theatrical. "Your Honor, this isn't just about a will. It's about a legacy that was hijacked. It's about a daughter erased from her own bloodline. And it's about a woman who used her wealth and power to silence anyone who dared remember." Evelyn's lead attorney objected, of course, but the judge allowed the line to stand. Then came the witnesses. Thomas testified first. He detailed the early years, Marguerite's fears, Evelyn's control over the estate, the sudden disappearance of Delia when she was just a baby. He spoke of the threats Margaret had received in her final year, the accidental fire in the estate's east wing, and the sudden rewriting of the will weeks before Margaret's passing. When the audio recording was played, Evelyn's voice clear, cold, saying no one will ever find her. The girl was a mistake from the beginning. There was a sharp intake of breath across the courtroom. Even Justice Lanford blinked. Evelyn didn't flinch. She leaned back, crossed her legs, and whispered something to her attorney. Then it was my turn. I stood. The courtroom suddenly felt much smaller. "My name is Miranda Thorne," I began, "and I was raised believing my worth was tied to obedience, to silence, to not asking questions." I explained everything. The funeral, the will, the safe, the letters, the discovery of Delia, the midnight calls, the confrontation. I spoke not with rage, but with clarity. I let the truth carry its own weight. And then Grace submitted the DNA report. Delia Everett, confirmed biological daughter of Margaret Everett. No one in the room breathed. "Where is she now?" the judge asked. I hesitated. "We don't know." Evelyn's lawyer pounced. "So you're claiming a mysterious heir, conveniently absent, should dismantle the legal standing of a well-established estate plan?" "I'm saying," I said calmly, "that Delia is alive, and that her absence is not proof of falsehood. but of fear. Justice Lanford leaned forward. And you believe Evelyn Blake was involved in her disappearance? I looked across the room. Evelyn stared at me like a hawk surveying prey. I believe Evelyn Blake erased her once, I said, and I believe she's trying to do it again. There was a pause after my statement, heavy, lingering, the kind that sticks to the walls of a courtroom like damp smoke. Justice Lanford scribbled something into her notes, then glanced up, her eyes scanning from me to Evelyn. We'll take a short recess, she said, tapping the gavel once. 15 minutes. The murmurs started the moment the gavel dropped. Reporters shifted in their seats, whispers skated across the benches, and Evelyn's legal team huddled like a sports team, down 10 points in the fourth quarter. I stepped out into the hallway, my hands still trembling slightly. Grace followed me, calm as ever, but her eyes carried the same guarded intensity I felt. Thomas was already there, pacing slowly beside a faded vending machine. She's cornered, I said quietly. She's dangerous, Grace corrected. Cornered predators don't roll over. They bite. And then, Miranda, I turned, and I froze. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe just more human. Her hair was shorter, her eyes darker, shadowed by years of absence. But I knew that face, even if time and trauma had redrawn its edges. Delia? She nodded. Thomas took a step forward. Where have you... Delia held up a hand. Later. For now, tell me what I need to say in that room. Grace recovered first. Do you have ID? Anything proving who you are? Delia pulled out a crumpled file folder. Inside, a birth certificate, a passport, a copy of the DNA results. I want this done, she said. Simply, I want to be free of her. When court resumed, the room shifted. People noticed. Evelyn noticed. Her attorney stiffened, whispered rapidly into her ear. Delia took the stand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at Evelyn. She told the story plainly, how she was taken from Margaret's care as a child, how she was moved across state lines under a false name, how she grew up believing she was unwanted, a burden, a favor Evelyn had done for someone until she wasn't useful anymore and disappeared into the system. Delia's voice wavered only once, when she talked about the letters Margaret had written to her, none of which she ever received. I was erased, she said softly, and I didn't even know I'd been there. Evelyn's team objected again and again, but the judge overruled each one. The facts were undeniable. The DNA, the documents, the audio, the motive, and then the real blow came when Grace presented financial records that showed Evelyn had been funneling estate funds into an offshore account labeled under the same alias Delia had been given. Fraud, embezzlement, concealment of a biological heir. By the end of the day, Justice Lanford's face was unreadable. She adjourned court with a simple statement. I will render my ruling tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Court is adjourned. Everyone rose. Evelyn didn't move. As I turned to leave, Delia touched my arm. You didn't stop, she said, even when no one believed she existed. I looked at her, the sister I barely knew. You were never the one who needed to prove herself. She was. We stepped into the hallway, the low hum of conversation still buzzing around us. Then Grace's phone rang. She picked up, listened for maybe 5 seconds, and her face changed completely. What is it? I asked. Her eyes locked on mine. That account? The one Evelyn used to hide the money? It was just accessed, she said, voice tight, from an IP address in Montreal. And the name used wasn't Yvonne's. Then who? I asked, heart hammering. Grace held up the screen. The name displayed was Caleb Thorne, I used. To think justice was a verdict, a slamming gavel, a frozen courtroom, a name cleared and a lie exposed. But justice, true justice, is quieter. It doesn't always come wrapped in a court ruling or a press headline. Sometimes it's just the ability to look in the mirror and know you didn't walk away when it would have been easier, that you didn't let the silence win. After the judge ruled in my favor, after Evelyn was taken away in handcuffs, after Delia reclaimed the identity that was stolen from her, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, unburdened. Like I had finally put down the weight of pretending I didn't care. My grandmother's estate was restored. The house in Vermont is mine now, but it doesn't feel like a trophy. It feels like a place where healing can begin. Grace visits often. Delia is taking things one step at a time, but we talk, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with laughter, and sometimes through tears. As for Caleb, well, that's a different story. One I'm not ready to tell yet. One I might never understand fully. Betrayal wears many faces, and some take longer to confront than others. But I've learned this much: survival is not enough. We deserve more than just getting by. We deserve to live, to speak, to claim the space we were once denied. I'm not the same woman who walked into that funeral in chapter 1. She was tired, careful, afraid to be seen as angry or difficult or too much. Now, I've embraced all of it because being too much is exactly what it took to survive people who wanted me to be less. If you're listening to this, reading this, remembering your own silence, know this: you are not crazy, you are not alone, and you are not too late. This was never just about an inheritance. It was about reclaiming the truth. And finally, I did. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.